right, everyone. This is episode 8 of Writers and Fighters. I appreciate everybody tuning in. I'm your host, AJ Ortega. And each week on this podcast, I interview somebody that's a writer or somebody that's a fighter. And this week, I got somebody in the fight game. This week, I interview Kenzie Landry. And she's a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu competitor and an assistant coach as well. She's real enthusiastic about working with children over at the Renzo Gracie Riverstone School in Houston. She's competed for Submission Hunter Pro, Grappling Industries, and other organizations. She's an IBJJF gold medalist. We talk about her start in the BJJ game. We talk about competition. We talk about what it's like coaching the little ones and teaching the skill of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And then we wrap up with some of her reading interests. So stick around for that interview. It's a fun one, and I'm always excited to talk with folks that do the thing, but then also teach or coach or train. And I think she has a really good eye and tremendous attitude. And so I know she's going to go places, and her students are going to continue to benefit from it. So stick around for that. Just a couple things before we get into the interview. Just a really funny little story. I was put into Facebook jail for 3 days. And I know you're like, oh, AJ, you must have said something terrible. How, they have those rules for a reason. And I agree, to a certain extent. But check it out. It's just funny. It's just a funny one. So I follow a bunch of, weird pages and groups, and I think one of them was about old archaeology or architecture or something like that. And it was a post on social media of a photo on Facebook, a photo of the steps of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And so the steps are made out of stone and they're real worn, right? So after however many years that thing's been around, the steps are kind of worn, these little grooves in these look like concrete or stone steps, right? So there's a picture of that. That's interesting. It's cool. And so one of the top comments, not mine, one of the comments I observed said, they slid down on their asses while the concrete was settling, because it looks like ass prints in the concrete, in the stone, I should say, right? And so I thought that was funny. So all I put as a reply to that comment was, LOL, crazy Italians. Because it's in Italy. Because the thing is in Italy. And Italians made it. And I thought, and clearly a joke because I put LOL in front of it. Clearly a joke because we know it's those grooves are from hundreds of years of footsteps and not people sliding down on their asses while the concrete settles. In no time, in a minute or two, I got an alert that said my account was suspended for 3 days. You can't like anything, you can't comment on stuff and all that. So yeah, I thought that was it was a little bit annoying, and I'm just glad I got released out of Facebook jail before I had to promote my podcast. So that was just a annoying, funny little story about, the attempts to keep online discourse civil, even in a public forum like Facebook. But yeah, funny one. LOL, crazy Italians, and I got the boot. I love Italians, though. All right. Moving along. So over the weekend, there was a UFC event, UFC 258. Just want to talk about the last couple matches there. The co-main event was Macy Barber, and they call her the Future, Macy the Future Barber. And she's good. She's solid. She came up through that Contender series, and then they gave her a legit contract and all this stuff. Well, her last match last year, about a year ago, maybe more, she jacked up her knee in the match against Roxanne Modafferi, who's a very durable veteran, one of the real pioneers that's still active in terms of women's mixed martial arts. And so she lost to Modafferi last year, which was a rough one because Macy Barber was heavily favored. And so she lost that one. Even with the knee injury happening and slowing her down and affecting that match, she was losing that match up until then. And so she has a match over the weekend against Alexa Grasso, Mexican MMA fighter. And so I'm partial there. I want her to do well for her and her country. And I thought it would be a little bit closer. The last round was quite interesting, but Alexa Grasso won the first 2 rounds pretty decisively. And I don't know what it was about Maycee Barber. I don't know if she was nervous or the quote unquote like ring rust that can happen if you're not in the ring actively and you're recovering from injury. But she was really oddly twitchy and trying to throw a lot of feints and try to get Alexa Grasso to bite on something. But she's throwing these weird kind of awkward feints and jabs from like several feet away. Like there's no chance she's hitting Alexa Grasso, like way out of range. And it looked odd. It looked like, why are you so busy? Like, why are you so wound up or something? And maybe fighters that would be intimidated by that or take the bait of a feint that's going to miss you by a foot, and that could give her opportunities to do something, particularly her grappling. But Alexa Grasso being I think a large part of it has to do with her being a Mexican fighter, and that the striking, she was just able to read those and never waver from that confidence she had on the feet. And I thought that was the real game changer, those first two rounds. And then and she also showed that she has a good ground game as well. Maycee Barber turned it up in that last round, but again, just not enough when you're down 2. So they gave it to Grasso 2 rounds to 1, 29-28. And good decision. And one of those situations where I feel bad for Maycee Barber because she could have been a little bit more polished and well-rounded and stuff without giving her so much so soon. And she's likable, and she is, conventionally attractive. And so there was a lot of talk about, and her herself and the UFC wanted her to be the youngest UFC champion. And that's cool and that's ambitious and you should be that. But when they put you in front of people that maybe you're not ready for, or coming off an intense loss, like such an upset like the one last year, and then getting put in there with just a shark, Not that I disagree with the decision, but it's going to be back to the drawing board for her. It's going to be back to the drawing board for her in terms of seeking those championship shots, and is that even doable? I think she'll remain a top 10 contender for years to come, but I don't know. That's a real deep division, that flyweight 125. And Alexa Grasso used to fight at strawweight, and so I thought she was great at 125 versus 115. She had a couple tough weight cuts in the past years ago, even 5 years ago, and then one recent one a few years ago. She was over 3-4 pounds, I think, over 4 pounds, coming in at 119 instead of 115. And so that match, that was supposed to be scheduled against Claudia Gadelha, and that fight got canceled because she was more than the 4 pounds that they allow. Even if you forfeit some of your purse and stuff like that, you got to get in there really, really close. And so 3 is unacceptable, and she was 4 or 5, I think, over the weight limit. And so she moved up to flyweight naturally and had a solid win last year. And then here she was this weekend and dominated those first 2 rounds and made a good impression, winning the fight by unanimous decision. So looking forward to what happens with Alexa Grasso, I should say. And then the main event was Kamaru Usman and Gilbert Burns at welterweight for the championship. And Kamaru Usman is on the thing is that he beat Gilbert Burns, but also set a record for welterweight consecutive wins. So that was the run that George St. Pierre had. So yeah, and just in the UFC alone, he's gotten a couple of fight of the nights, performance of the nights, defended the welterweight championship 4 or 5 times. Yeah, I don't know who beats Kamaru Usman. He's beat everybody in the past, everybody quite decisively. Several of his fights have gone the distance, and some people think he's not super exciting. I don't think he's particularly exciting. Again, he's just a great technical wrestler and striker, but really just showing off on the feet in the last few fights against Covington Masvidal and then Gilbert Burns over the weekend. And yeah, I don't know what matchup is the one to make now, but that's a real deep division, that welterweight division, with Kamaru Usman being at the top and not sure who can compete with him. And so now there's conversations about Kamaru Usman being the greatest of all time, at least at welterweight. And I think there's a conversation to be had there for sure. I don't know if he has the draw as much as George St. Pierre did back in the day, and even now, if he were to get back into the octagon. But I think that, it's a conversation worth having because the game does evolve. The game is not the same as it was when George St. Pierre was welterweight champion. And so I think it's okay to acknowledge that, hey, he was the greatest at that time in that era. But the game's evolved and the fighters have to evolve with it. So in any case, I'm looking forward to see who they put in front of Kamaru Usman. Also interesting that Kamaru Usman, we got Israel Adesanya coming up, and then in a month or less we got the Francis Ngannou and Stipe match. And so if Usman retained and Israel Adesanya goes on to beat Blankovitz, if he goes on to beat him and then Ngannou beats Stipe, we will have 3 champions in the UFC that are from African countries, with Izzy Adesanya and Usman being Nigerian and Francis Ngannou being from Cameroon. So that's interesting. Again, it's just one of those things I like looking at that stuff and, what about the representation and fighting styles and attitudes that come from different regions and cultures. And so I think that's interesting. I think it'd be interesting to have three fighters from African countries holding those belts. Oh, right. So that's a quick little recap of the last 2 fights there, which were cool. Good exciting ones. Good exciting ones there at the end of UFC 258. All right, y'all. So let's get into the interview portion now. So in this interview portion, I talked to Kenzie Landry, BJJ practitioner and assistant coach. So I hope you guys enjoy it because I sure did. Thanks. All right, I'm sitting here with Kenzie Landry. She's a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu practitioner out of Texas, specifically Houston, correct?
I am currently in Houston. I actually started in Lafayette, Louisiana.
Oh, so is Louisiana home?
Louisiana is home. I spent some time in Youngsville, Lafayette, and moved to Mandeville, which is right across the causeway from New Orleans.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. New Orleans is one of my favorite cities. I've only been there a handful of times, but it is one of my favorite cities. Best food on the planet, all that stuff.
Louisiana in general. I think Lafayette has better food.
Oh, really?
Home sweet home, though.
Okay.
To beat that.
And so what first got you interested in BJJ?
My dad was very self-defense oriented growing up, so I had actually trained a little bit as a teen. I was the only woman and the only teen in the adult class, so I ended up not sticking with it for too long. He ended up getting me a new job working behind a desk at a BJJ gym. And I had done a little bit of striking after that, so I was like, look, I'll punch some stuff if you want me to punch, but there's no way I'm rolling around on the ground with sweaty people.
Muay Thai or boxing? Or
It was karate at
okay.
first.
No, don't make that face. Come on.
And then I did a little bit of Muay Thai later. Boxing is very new to me still. I haven't trained boxing much.
Cool.
But it wasn't until I would see the kids come in and I was working the desk and they were like, look, you're a female. We need an extra pair of hands on deck. Just come put Band-Aids on the kids and hold the kids when they cry and just make sure they let go when they tap. You don't need to really know anything about jiu-jitsu. So I spent 3 months teaching the kids and helping in the kids class before I ever stepped foot in the adult class and ended up never going back, never looking back.
Oh, how cool. And so you got your first experience being an assistant to wrangle the little kids. That's great.
Babies are my favorite.
No, that's such a cool experience. I have very little martial arts experience, a little bit of boxing, but as a teenager, late teenager, 15, 16, 17, I was like in a kung fu gym, and it got to the point where it's like, okay, well, you warm up the kids because the class would get split up, but it was like they were from like 4 or 5 years old to 17, 18. It's like, oh, well, warm them up. And yeah, the little kids, they get so distracted. They're trying to do their punches, but they're looking like out the window and barely paying attention. It's hilarious, but it was cool just because warm them up for 15, 20 minutes and hand it over to the instructor, and then there you go. So I think that's really cool that was your first hands-on stuff.
Yeah, those ones that get distracted out of the window are my absolute favorite. I want the 3 to 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds over any age for sure. Once they hit 16 and 17, it's like, you're too much of an adult.
Oh yeah, and that was about 16. They're like, oh, you're gonna go into the adult class, and I'm like, but they're like men. Like and there's like college guys kicking my ass. Like, and I'm like, oh boy.
It's hard to fuss at 16-year-olds because I'm only 5'2", and so I have to like look up at them and scold them. But, yeah, I much prefer the babies.
Okay, and so after you started doing that for a bit, and then you started to train a little bit more regularly and aggressively, then?
Yeah, that's a good.
Is that a way to put it?
I think the first thing I kind of realized that I think most women end up realizing. I got to watch this today, and I thought this was really cool. But one of the first things I noticed when I started training a lot more is I was not as weak as I thought I was. And the coolest thing about jiu-jitsu is it takes men who walk in thinking that they own the world, and it shows them like, hey, you're not as strong as you think you are. And then you take a woman, and it teaches the woman, you are so much stronger than you think you are. And it's just this great equalizer.
No, it's one of those really, I think it's part of the story in the like American consciousness of BJJ is that story that it doesn't matter how big or small you are, that you can manipulate somebody's body this way if you're smarter, if you're trained, if you're more technical, if you're ahead of them in this way. And there is that story of the early UFC, the Gracies, and really like defeating people that were like, well, who's this little guy in like a karate gi? It's like, well, nobody had seen anything like that yet, right? Unless you were really plugged into the sport. And yeah, and I think that's one of the big advantages to getting people on board. There's too many YouTube videos of tough guys walking into a BJJ gym and just getting manhandled. And I don't get tired of them. I'll watch them forever.
Yeah. I hope one day I will be able to be a mat enforcer. I feel like I'm just a little too small to take on just about anyone who walks through the doors. But man, I love the mat enforcers and watching people learn. People come in and they have such different things they need to learn. Everyone needs to learn something different. Sure.
Yeah. We would get sometimes, people would come into our kung fu gym from like, again, a karate gym or taekwondo gym from across town or something. And it's like, oh boy, you shouldn't have let people know that one. And, well, this is what we're about. This is how we train here and take liberties with you and stuff. In your early training, what was something like maybe surprising or interesting in like those first days or weeks of training where you're like, what did something that was surprising or interesting?
But besides the fact that I was stronger than I thought I do, one of my favorite memories that I still think of is I'm a small adult. And when I started training with the kids. And so they'd be like, all right, go practice this technique with this kid. That kid also included the teens. And man, my first couple weeks of getting destroyed by teenagers, those are some of my favorite memories looking back now. Kids are so flexible, and you teach them, and they're so malleable. You take a child and you teach them, and they just run with that information. So definitely getting beat up by teenagers.
No, yeah, it's like, favorite. Okay, well, I'm X amount of age, so I must have something on you. No, not when you're on the mat, right?
It's great at equalizing. I remember after a couple months, finally being able to control myself with the teens age group and being like, now I'm tough shit. Like,
that's great. And so what level of competition do you compete at? Because I saw some footage of a December event there in Houston of you grappling. Looked like at least you were no-gi, right?
Pink hair?
I believe so.
I think you're talking about the one I had dyed my hair pink for. That was
for sure.
the Rose event. It was a fundraiser for breast cancer awareness that Eric Garcia put together. I've been a big fan of Eric Garcia's promotions. I've done 5 to 6 professional fights, super fights, jiu-jitsu matches under him. He beautiful event, so well put together. I believe, and I'm not sure I'm supposed to be talking about this, but I believe he got a UFC Fight Pass agreement for 2021.
Oh, neat.
So I think starting soon, if not now, all of his fights are going to be broadcasted on that. The breast cancer awareness event was the first one that was supposed to be, and I was on the prelims card. I don't believe I actually made it onto Fight Pass, but that is definitely an upcoming goal of mine.
Oh, that's awesome. And so how does that work then in terms of you competing there at that, that event there? Do they break them up by experience level, size, both? Obviously, they divided it by gender. And so how do they figure everything out that way and organize it?
The event that you were looking at, so those are professional matches. So they pick you and they partner someone up your rank, your size, your sex.
Okay.
As much as I love competing on that big stage with the big lights and the big audience where everyone's eyes are on you, my favorite experiences competing are the really small local competitions like I went to today, where sometimes they're not going to have people your size, they're not going to have people your weight, you're going to be going up. I've competed at the 185 bracket before because I just needed rounds.
Sure.
Ended up podiuming, ended up doing pretty well. Cool. My last time I did a small tournament was at the Zone right next door to my house, and I ended up getting put in the men's bracket, and I placed silver. But right. You don't always get matches at those small tournaments, but it's so cool to watch how your local community grows, and there's always new people starting and they're always improving. So my heart goes out to those small tournaments where they're not as successfully divided up as they should be, but those professional matches, they do a very good job of setting up good matches, fair fights.
Right. So they have matchmakers somewhere, a booker of some kind to be like trying to figure out what's going to be a good matchup. But yeah, that's cool. Oh, that's great. And so we talked about when you started training kids and so you train you were training the kids at the Renzo Gracie School in Houston. Is that what is that a Riverstone? Is that the same? Is there two?
I'm currently. There's actually many. My Professor Brian Marvin has set up a lot of Renzo Gracie schools in the surrounding area. I think 5 locally.
Okay.
So I started off at the main location in Sugar Land. He really helped me out through the COVID stuff. As soon as they opened back up, he helped me out. And then I branched off to Riverstone, which is where I'm currently with Joe Murphy. And man, I love it there. But I previously started teaching kids back in Lafayette under Gladiators Academy.
One thing I saw, I think on your Instagram, and that you're plant-based. You're vegan?
Yes.
And one of your shirts, what the shirt? Remind me what the shirt says.
Be kind to animals or I'll kill you is one of my favorites.
Yeah, that one. Yeah. And you're wearing like your rash guard, all intense, and I'm like, oh boy, cool. Yeah.
I actually got that T-shirt at IBJJF. I got first in my bracket, one of my first IBJJF gold medals, and my roommate brought me that shirt as a reward, and so I got to like pose with my medal in that shirt.
No, it's interesting, as I've been, looking at all sorts of different kinds of people in the fight game, and not just UFC or something like that, but looking at all sorts of stuff and regional stuff, and it's interesting how many boxers, BJJ practitioners and stuff like this have plant-based or vegan in their little title now. And I'm like, well, I don't need any more proof than like the Diaz brothers are vegan and they're badass dudes in BJJ and everything else, right? Bad boxers and stuff. And I was like, is that something that was established well before your training?
No, actually, when I started training, I've slowly been progressing towards this goal. This was a goal it took me maybe 7 years to hit fully vegan. I did limit my red meat intake when I had started jiu-jitsu, but I've only been vegan for 2 years now, and I've been training for 4.
Okay.
I did notice a huge increase in my stamina, And being so small, I feel like my speed and my stamina, that's all I got. That's the card I was dealt.
For
One of
sure.
my best friends and my best training partners is also vegan. And I feel if I lack anything in my sport, it's explosiveness. And I in the back of my brain, I'm like, maybe it's because I'm vegan, maybe everyone else is right. My best friend is vegan and he is the most explosive human being I've ever met in my life. And so it's just body types and maximizing your potential with what you have and working with what you have. And I feel like veganism has definitely increased my staminism, and it makes me feel better.
Oh yeah, yeah. The eating clean and all that kind of stuff. I think can only do good for your training. Yeah,
Hmm.
and again, it's like I think there's a trend, and there are people that are doing not well, like exceptional, and I'm like, okay, like the argument kind of falls apart. They're like, oh, well, you won't be as strong. It's like really, like I think that's
Yeah,
a myth, clearly a myth now. Um,
definitely thrive on it for sure.
and so I saw that Lauren Murphy's associated with the Enzo Gracie School, right?
So I work under Joe Murphy, and
Right.
he is married to Lauren Murphy. And so this morning, Lauren has done such an amazing job of pulling the community of women together. Our mats were full this morning of women, and she was preparing some of our students for competing today. I went to a competition, a little local competition earlier today, and Lauren is such an incredible human being. Definitely one of the people I admire the most. I also admire Joe. My coach is one of my favorite people.
Wow.
He's just so good at connecting with people, and that's all I want. That's all I want in life is to be able to connect with my kids as well as he can.
No, that's good that you have good examples there, and again that having a coach, a trainer, instructor that again speaks your same language, right? In the gym, you know exactly what I mean, right? That they have to speak your same language, and some people won't jive with that, and some people will line up exactly with that. And
Mhm.
I think that's super fortunate that yeah, that you're connected with them in that way.
I
Um,
definitely, me and my professor have very similar teaching styles, and I think with the kids, it's just so easy to teach with him.
And that's one of the best tricks. I'm an English professor. That's my the day job,
Oh, cool.
And so my only advice to like people that are in the teaching, training, coaching kind of thing is like think of like your teachers, trainers, coaches, professors, and just the ones that were shitty, don't do that. The ones that were awesome and made you remember stuff and like oh my god and blew your mind, like just do that. And that's all I do, and have managed to eke out a living with it. And so I think that's great that you emulate what works, and it's not that complicated. That I think as teachers, professors, and trainers, we can overcomplicate shit. But what's working? Do more of that,
It is nice to have such a clear idea of what I want present with me in the gym every day. It's such a nice thing to have.
Yeah, that they share a vision, right?
Hmm.
And I'm sure it rubs off. I mean, I'm sure it's the culture of the school,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, we have a great setting at that gym. It's just the community is priceless, and I'm sure every jiu-jitsu family anywhere will say that their family is the best family, but it's just a priceless community to be involved in.
I think that that's a human thing too. That you want to be around people, you want to connect. Usually that's part of our
Hmm.
seeking humanity, I guess.
Yeah. I read something somewhere. I have no evidence. I have no idea if this is true, but it was saying that jiu-jitsu can literally be addictive because of how much human contact you come into, and so then you start to crave that same physical contact, and that just brings you back to the door every day.
Oh yeah. Again, it's when we talk about combat sports and things that are in close combat. Wrestling and jujitsu are the closest things you can do in terms
Hmm.
of like competition, really.
Yeah.
Um, and even in the training and the rolling, on the regular, certainly has to do something, because it's so unique too. What do you got as far as upcoming goals? Like, what do you want to do with your training? And you're young. I mean, you've alluded to that a couple times. You're young. You're like early 20s, huh?
23.
Okay. And so, what kind of long term goals do you have? Because you're kind of,
Long-term goals, I definitely want my own kids competition team. That is what would make me the happiest in the world. As far as like owning a gym and having students and teaching parents, the kids competition team is what I want, because nothing as beautiful as watching a kid grow and learn and fail and succeed and keep going. So that's the end goal. I saw one of our local brown belts today, Maggie Torres, and she just got a brown belt and she just had a baby. And she has her gym, and they had this huge kids competition team. And right before she sat down to coach her kids, they had a man, undisclosed, I'm not even sure of his name. And there are just some coaches that make me churn a little bit, that saying things that aren't helpful and being negative. And then Maggie sat down in that chair, and everything she said was positive and useful. And then next to her coaching was her sleeping little baby. And I'm like, oh my God, that's all I want in my whole life, is to be right there with the kids competition team and that chunky cheeked little baby next to me. That's what I want to be when I grow up, is Maggie Torres.
That's awesome. There's some, especially with the kids, I hear you when you hear about a bad coach. Because it's like, well, no, you're the adult, you're the authority figure, and they're kids. Like, not like, I have a friend that her kid's in football, and the football coach is fucking is one of those motherfuckers, that's just, and the football culture has all that nonsense and stupid shit that, and I'm sorry, I mean,
you're good.
Used to be a fan, but it's hard to be a fan of football these days. Anyways, but there's that negative stuff, right? Then you see the hyperbolized version, the bad instructor in like the Karate Kid movie, right? Like, and these kinds of things. But that's like a real thing. There's some nasty people out there that are in charge of children. And yeah, I think we need more coaches like you and Miss Torres that are just going to be enriching kids' lives, where they're the most malleable. Like you said, they're very moldable. They're clay, and they pick up on our shit, and
yes.
So
it's another thing, that they're so malleable. Sometimes I see parents in competition, and man, if you just tell a kid at the end of the day, win, lose, fail, think, whatever, if you just tell them, man, I love seeing you compete. I'm glad you had fun. I hope you had fun, and I'm proud of you, and I want to see you do it again. Those are the kids that succeed. I see so many parents that are like, why didn't you take the back? and it just reinserts in their brain that they're everything that they think they're not, rather than just the little positive nuggets that you got to throw at them every now and then.
Oh yeah, and I was fortunate that, like, my parents encouraged all my most of my stuff and whatever, and took me to my martial arts tournaments and my kung fu tournaments. And I remember one time I got my ass kicked in like a tournament, and I was gassed. I was, fought 3 times or whatever. And,
yeah.
and I ended up, getting like the bronze little medal thingy. And first thing my dad says is, he says it in Spanish. I guess the equivalent would be like, oh, you got gassed out. Like you ran out of breath, or you were too tired, and I was just like, fuck. Like, I already got my ass kicked. I already feel bad that I could have taken, but yeah, I have fucking asthma. Like, and I was like, that's the last thing I needed to hear. And I was going to say that to rag on my old man, because, again, that stuff was but again, my instructor wasn't telling me shit like that. He was like, oh, you kicked ass and this and that, But yeah, I was like, that's not what I needed to hear.
My dad has always been pretty good when it comes to self-defense and just kind of having a decent understanding of the sport and failing in general. And the only professional match I have lost to Frozen Elsa, boss ass bitch. Anyway, caught me in an armbar, and I remember calling my dad after, being like, I lost, and he was like, if you're not getting your ass kicked, you're not learning. And I'm like, thank you, you're right. You're not wrong. I needed to hear that.
What about that feeling? That's a good one. Like that, once you kind of hit your stride and do pretty good, bring home a couple little trophies, you're like, I'm kind of good, right? And then, like, there's always, that's the fight game, that there's always somebody better than you, right? There's always somebody that has an edge, or just has your number on that fucking day.
Mm-hmm.
What about that, and that kind of defeat and coping with that?
It's funny to talk about defeat, because I have lost to an opponent just on that day in competition, and then came across them on the mat, because it's such a small community. You come across them on the mats and you roll and you dominate them the next week, and it's so much of a mental game. It's the majority of it is within your head.
Sure.
So when you take that loss and just coming back from that, it's more of a mental game than it is a physical one.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Can you remember a time when like you were just like outclassed and like you couldn't do what you wanted to do? Like, I don't know, this is just like a phenomenon. I know it happens to people. Like in a dream, if you fight, like you're too slow in a dream.
You can't punch.
Yeah, because it's such a. I read that the psychology behind it is that there's such precise moves that like when you're asleep, like your brain can't do, and that's why you can't really reach for doorknobs in dreams. Yeah. Weird shit like this. Anyways, have you ever been in a real fight that way where you're like, I can't?
No, I have never been in a real fight.
Even, I mean real in terms of like even on the mat at a competition where like, I can't tie this person up. This person's getting through everything.
So I did like a 10-week challenge or whatever. And one of the, on Instagram, just posting memories to my Instagram. And one of them I did was my favorite failures. And by far my favorite failure, her name was Macy Bro. I will never forget her. Little MMA. I think I might've been a white belt. I'm pretty sure I was a white belt and she was a blue. And I'm feeling hot, like I'm hot shit. Like, all right, I got you. I got your number. And I prefer judo. I know she's MMA. I know she wrestles. And I'm like, I got this. You don't even have to worry. And we slap bump. I try and hip throw her. She grabbed me. She sat down. She wrecked my world. And so then that was my first or second competition. And I registered for like 4. That was my second match of the day. And I registered for 4 brackets at a time. And so I'm like, I have the whole day left to compete. And I was torn to pieces because I was so sure that I had it. And she ended up like taking a picture and posting it. And I'm like, she posted a picture of me losing. And it tore me up on the inside for a year. And then after the end of the year, looking back, that's 100% one of my favorite memories. And I posted the same picture she posted as one of my favorite failures.
That's a good one. Yeah. We try to hip toss her. She just stands there like a tree.
Nope. Not happening. Yeah, she whooped me. I've been whooped plenty of times. My first competition was in Houston. Even though my tournament in Lafayette canceled, they're like, we'll refund you and we'll send you to Houston and we'll let you in free. I'm like, you got it. So I didn't have a coach. I had 8 brackets. I had 4 brackets, like 2 people in each bracket. So that's 8 matches for the day. And I won 2, and it was the same girl. And so like I just got destroyed. In my next one, I'm like, you know what? I got competition experience now. I'm going to invite my family. They're all going to come watch. I'm going to kick ass. 8 people. I won once. They watched me get destroyed.
Oh no. But
those are the times that I remember more than winning. When you win, you don't learn as much when you win. You bet your ass I got home from those losses and I'm sitting there taking notes, rewatching the videos, what I do wrong, what can I do better. You win and you're like, I'm posting that on Instagram. Done. Cut that highlight reel.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, one of my failures, I was glad nobody I knew was there. Yeah, it was because we'd do like the martial arts tournaments in town. This is El Paso, Texas. And one time my instructor got a little van and he's like, we're going to a tournament in Mexico. We just drive across the border. And we'd kick ass in town and always do pretty well. Man, we went down there and got our asses whooped, man. Like, and it was one of those where I was like, what are they doing? What do they feed them? Like, because they all just hit harder, were faster. And in those situations where, some of them didn't like have belts, like no ranking. So they're like, I guess you'll just fight this guy. I was like, that guy whooped my ass way too much. He's not on my level. And I get home with like a black eye and all this kind of stuff. But nobody came because, international kind of travel and whatnot, so not a big crowd, at least from people I knew.
Getting your ass whooped in front of people is it's a different story. I prefer to go out and do stuff like that. Like I want to travel. I don't need a coach. I don't want anyone there. Just let me go win or fail on my own.
Let me get some practice in. Yeah, let me get some real deal new people to roll with, and whatever happens. So this is the Writers and Fighters podcast. Clearly you're a fighter over here, grappling all over the place and training these kids. But do you write anything or read?
I do not write. I do love to read. I love to read things about the mind. One of my favorite books is Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. And it's just about creating creating your own reality, basically. And those are just kind of the books that changed my perspective on what I thought my life was, at least, and how you genuinely create heaven or hell for yourself while you're still on earth, and your choices fund those ideas. And wherever you spend your energy is where you're going to go. Another book I really liked was Dropping Ashes on the Buddha, and it just really gave me the idea that collectively we are all one big thing as a whole. And those are just two of my favorite concepts.
That's really cool that you got the kind of a big picture one. This kind of you said it was Buddhist was in the title. Remember the title?
Dropping Ashes on the Buddha.
Yeah, and so this kind of big picture thing about our kind of connected humanity and so on versus the mindset kind of stuff that you read, which is not uncommon for athletes. It's usually if athletes read, they're reading mindset stuff, which I think is dope. I love that. Yeah,
definitely my favorite genre is mindset stuff. This started with one of my coaches, Scott Sullivan. He would always hand me books, and he'll be like, "This is what we're teaching the kids, so it's important that you know this." So one of the first books as an adult I remember picking up was Success Principles for Teens.
Okay,
and it was just mindset stuff. It was just positive thinking and practicing and being consistent and being responsible. And I'm like, well, shit, now I got to read something else.
Yeah.
And so that's just kind of the stuff I'm into now, because it helps. I just want to be like my Professor Joe, and I feel like he already knows all this shit. So I gotta go and catch up on it all.
No, I think that's good. I think those are good reading selections and tie in well with the practice of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu.
Absolutely.
Something that is, again, hyper physical, but of all, the martial arts, it's again, a very, you got to be smart to be really good at Jiu Jitsu, and so I think there's a tie in there, and even just the kind of moving and progressing and the mindset that you need to get better at anything, but particularly sports and athletic stuff and fight things and
and my biggest reason, I think my biggest motivator is the fact that I am still technically kind of a coach. So I still have those kids that are going to come up to me and be like, I'm terrified. And I say kids, I had a grown ass adult today. And I'm just like, I have to figure out what to say to help these people, because I'm still scared myself most of the time. So that's why I read. It's for other people and my kiddos.
I love it. That's great. So where can people find you online and see?
Anything I'm on is at the Kenzie Blair, Facebook, Instagram. I am mostly on Instagram because of Jiu Jitsu State of Mind. Those guys are my sponsors, and they're incredible. I love all their products. So you'll see me and Jiu Jitsu State of Mind on my Instagram page.
Great. So that's the Kenzie Blair on Instagram,
yes,
and also Jiu Jitsu State of Mind. We'll give you some follows and clicks and all that good stuff. All right, Kenzie. Hey, I enjoyed this talk, man. I appreciate you making time, and good luck with those kids, man. They need you. They need you.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care. All right, yeah, I hope you enjoyed that interview. I certainly did. Time went by real fast on that one, talking to Kenzie. If you want to follow Kenzie, and you should, go over to Instagram. Follow her at the Kenzie Blair. You should also follow her sponsors because they support her, so we should support them. You can find them on Instagram at Jiu Jitsu State of Mind. Jiu Jitsu State of Mind on Instagram. If you want to keep up with the podcast, make sure you follow us on all social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We even got a YouTube. You can go to ridersandfighters.com and get the full list of all of our social media. If you want to be very gracious, make sure you follow us on Spotify. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes. Leave a rating on iTunes. That would be super dope. Next week, I'll be having a writer on, so stay tuned for that. I appreciate all the feedback I've been getting. I've heard that the interview questions are good, that the guests are interesting, that the production is actually pretty good. I appreciate all that. All that good stuff keeps us going. So make sure you support the podcast and support our guests. We will see you guys next week.